The Clarence Thomas stories that PBS refused to tell. I gave an interview about the Supreme Court justice that ended up on the cutting room floor. Hey race, what the network didn't air. A popular tactic of American politics, especially on the left, is to attack the character of those with whom you don't agree. This was evident with the recent show, Clarence and Ginni Thomas, Politics, Power and the Supreme Court, which PBS aired on May 9. A PBS producer emailed me last January about a planned documentary on the life and legacy of Justice Thomas, who used to work for me. The producer wrote that she wanted to speak to those closest to him to present a nuanced portrait, and she would, therefore, like to request an interview. I agreed to an interview that lasted an hour and a half. That was my mistake. The resulting show was far from nuanced, and it wasn't really a documentary. It was a 2-hour hit job on the character of Clarence Thomas. I am indeed close to the justice. He worked for me twice, first as an assistant Missouri Attorney General, then later as a legislative assistant in my Senate office. In the nearly 50 years I have known him, I have never commented publicly on his judicial philosophy or discussed with him a case before the court. My relationship with Justice Thomas can be summed up succinctly: I am his friend. Trusting that PBS wanted personal memories that illustrated the character of my friend, I shared 3 stories that go to the heart of the man. Maybe because these stories contradicted the narrative PBS chose to present, it didn't run any of them. The only excerpts from my interview it showed were biographical filler. To tell the real story of the person I know, I now relate what I told my interviewer and what PBS declined to show. The first story is from when I was Missouri Attorney General and Clarence Thomas was in his 20s. Another young lawyer in our office, Dick Wheeler, was a quadriplegic. Dick could operate a motorized wheelchair and used a stick between his teeth to turn the pages of law books and use a phone. He relied on friends to care for his basic daily needs. Clarence helped care for Dick and remained his friend until Dick's death in 2011, well after Justice Thomas joined the Supreme Court. The second story is from 2003. At the behest of my wife, Sally, then on the board of Mary Institute and Country Day School in St. Louis, Justice Thomas spent a day at the school meeting with students. That evening, the school held a public forum for Justice Thomas in the gymnasium, inviting students, teachers, parents and friends. A large crowd showed up. After making remarks and fielding questions, Justice Thomas greeted a line of guests who wanted to speak with him. One characteristic of Clarence Thomas is that when you talk to him, you have his undivided attention as though you are the only person in the world. He looks straight at you and listens to every word. On that evening, a boy of 13 or 14 reached the front of the line. He spoke with Justice Thomas for about 10 minutes, the justice looking at him intently. When the boy walked away, I saw tears running down his cheeks. It turned out that he was biracial and had shared the challenges he faced in finding his identity. My wife, Justice Thomas, and I were the last people in the gym that evening, departing after janitors had already stacked up the folding chairs. Finally, in 2017, Justice Thomas was the featured speaker at the annual Law Day luncheon sponsored by the Bar Association of Metropolitan St. Louis and held in a hotel ballroom. After the speech, the association had arranged a reception for the luncheon sponsors to be held in a separate room that was reached by traversing the hotel's basement. Something of a procession was hustling through the large kitchen area on the way to the next event when Justice Thomas spotted a middle-aged woman with a mop and a pail washing the floor. The justice came to a halt, as did the procession, and he engaged the woman in conversation for what seemed about 5 minutes, after which the woman, mop still in hand, threw her arms around an associate justice of the Supreme Court. It's important to tell these stories, and there are many like them, because in opposing his jurisprudence the opponents of Justice Thomas have gone after his character. The portrait they have painted of him is entirely wrong. If he were the angry, abusive, corrupt person they present him as being, then we might say of the attacks, well, he had it coming. But he is the opposite. He is joyful, kind and steadfast in the principles he holds. Anyone who thinks that he could be corrupted by the generosity of his friends doesn't know Clarence Thomas. As for the people at PBS, I regret that they duped me into a long interview that went nowhere. Even though they're subsidized with taxpayer money, I respect their editorial freedom to broadcast whatever they please, however biased and lacking in nuance. But in the interest of accuracy, I ask that they not fob off a political hit job as a documentary. The Clarence Thomas stories that PBS refused to tell. I gave an interview about the Supreme Court justice that ended up on the cutting room floor. Hey race, what the network didn't air. A popular tactic of American politics, especially on the left, is to attack the character of those with whom you don't agree. This was evident with the recent show, Clarence and Ginni Thomas, Politics, Power and the Supreme Court, which gun and abortion laws have made Texas a woman's nightmare. Forget about Texas being pro-life. When it comes to guns, abortion and the lives of women, Texas has chosen the path of death. The effective overturn of abortion access for women in Texas means that women must now travel out of state to safely end their pregnancies. In addition to that burden, many advocates for women have feared that these barriers would increase the risk of women being trapped in abusive relationships, as carrying a pregnancy to term and giving birth ties women more closely to abusers, via their shared children. As if that weren't enough, gun owners in Texas, including domestic abusers, have simultaneously become more empowered because of the state's permitless carry laws, and because of a federal appeals court ruling striking down a law that prohibited people under domestic violence restraining orders from having guns. Advocates have hypothesized that pregnant women in Texas and their unborn children would be more likely to die at the hands of the men in their lives. These fears became a fatal reality last week for 26-year-old Gabriela Gonzalez, who was allegedly killed by her boyfriend, 22-year-old Harold Thompson, after returning to Dallas from Colorado, where she had obtained an abortion. According to law enforcement, surveillance video from a parking lot shows Thompson trying to choke Gonzalez. Shortly afterward, officers have said, Thompson is seen pulling a gun and shooting Gonzalez in the head, then shooting her several more times after she hit the ground. Gonzalez died at the scene. Thompson was arrested and charged with murder. He is being held in the Dallas County Jail without bond. This is a tragedy that anyone who knows anything about domestic violence might have seen coming. Gonzalez's family said they had previously reported Thompson's controlling and violent behavior to the police. A May affidavit, in which Gonzalez is described as the victim, states that he had beaten his victim, given her a black eye and threatened to harm her and her family. In an interview with Dallas NBC station, Gonzalez's mother said that the family had filed a report about Thompson's abuse with local police in March and made multiple attempts to reach authorities, but that the police never contacted them. Gonzalez's sister, who witnessed the killing, said Thompson was angry that Gonzalez had wanted to get away from him, and that Gonzalez had wanted to leave, but she couldn't. According to research